Pam Bondi showed up to the Supreme Court without a single lawyer by her side. By the end of the hearing, Justice Amy Coney Barrett was questioning everything she thought she knew. The headline hit like a rock through a stained glass window. Ethics complaint filed against former Attorney General Pam Bondi. Supreme Court may intervene. In Tallahassee, whispers turned into newsroom chatter. People who'd once shaken Bondi's hand were now asking behind closed doors if they'd ever really known her. The complaint alleged she'd used her influence to secure private contracts for lobbying groups, all while still holding state office. Conflict of interest, misuse of position, backdoor deals, words like that don't just stain a career, they erase it. But Pam Bondi? She didn't flinch. Reporters parked outside her home in Southwood, trying to catch even a raised eyebrow. But the woman who once stood next to governors and presidents just carried her coffee to the porch, opened a legal pad, and wrote in silence. No press conference, no spokesperson, no public statement, just her and the morning air. Inside the U.S. Supreme Court building, though, Justice Amy Coney Barrett was paying attention. She sat behind a desk cluttered not with law books, but with handwritten notes. Barrett was no stranger to cases that reeked of media fuel and political undertones, but this one felt different. Not because of the complaint itself, but because of who filed it. An anonymous former aide. No signature, no trail. Just a pile of documents sent to multiple legal ethics committees and one sharp copy directed straight to Barrett's office. Her clerk flagged it with a single note. This one might be real. Most justices would have passed it down to a lower court or ignored the noise altogether. But Barrett kept circling it. The accusations were serious, but strangely clean. Almost too clean. A week later, Barrett surprised everyone. She requested a preliminary ethics review herself. That raised eyebrows. A Supreme Court justice taking on an ethics case at this level? That didn't happen often. It was like a lion stepping into a backyard brawl. But when you're one of the most watched legal figures in the country, you don't just move without reason. Barrett saw something under the surface. She just didn't know what yet. Florida officials scrambled. Legal analysts across cable news channels speculated on everything from disbarment to prison time. She could lose everything, one anchor said. Her legacy, her license, her career. Still, Bondi didn't hire a lawyer. That silence became louder than any defense. Even her longtime critics were baffled. She's arrogant, some said. She thinks she's smarter than the court. Others whispered something else. Or maybe she knows something we don't. By the time the official summons arrived, Bondi was already preparing for Washington. No fanfare, no entourage, just a crisp navy blue suit, one worn leather briefcase, and a stack of notes she wrote by hand. Reporters trailed her at the airport. One asked, "Ms. Bondi, do you believe the allegations against you are politically motivated?" She looked up. Her voice was steady. "I believe in the law. I also believe it can be abused." She didn't say another word. On the other side, Barrett tightened her circle. She canceled 2 speaking engagements, cleared her private schedule, and began prepping for the hearing with the intensity of someone chasing something invisible. She wasn't out to destroy Pam Bondi. She wanted truth, clarity, structure. Still, those close to her said she was unusually reserved in the days leading up to the review. "There's something about this one," she told her clerk. "Something that doesn't sit right." That was all she said. As the court date loomed, Washington buzzed with speculation. Some said Barrett would make an example out of Bondi, prove that even the high and mighty could fall. Others whispered that the case itself was a trap meant to distract from deeper issues in Florida's legal system. But only 2 people seemed fully calm, the justice and the accused. But calm doesn't always mean unarmed. It was a sharp morning in Washington, dry air, low sun, a quiet tension hanging over First Street and inside the marble pillars of the Supreme Court, the atmosphere was rigid but alert. Security was tight, press badges dangled from suit jackets, and legal clerks paced like they'd skipped breakfast. Everyone was waiting for the same thing, the entrance, Pam Bondi. At exactly 8:42 a.m., she appeared at the top of the steps, alone. No aides, no legal team. Just her, wearing a pale gray suit, hair tied back, and a single brown briefcase that looked older than some of the justices inside. She moved deliberately, eyes forward, no hesitation. Not performative, just controlled. People took pictures. One reporter whispered, She really came solo? The answer was obvious and deliberate. Inside the chamber, Justice Amy Coney Barrett was already seated, chin raised slightly, not in arrogance, just control. She skimmed the preliminary notes one last time. Her eyes lifted only when Bondi entered. The room didn't gasp. It didn't need to. The silence said more than sound ever could. Bondi took her place at the center table. Her hands rested flat, palms down. She didn't scan the room or look for support. She stared straight ahead, waiting, calm. The lead counsel for the prosecution rose first, Jared Keener, a polished federal attorney known for his sharp memory and rehearsed delivery. He cleared his throat and began. Your Honors, we are here today to determine the truth behind serious allegations that former Attorney General Pamela J. Bondi violated state and federal ethics laws, specifically by leveraging her public office for private financial gain. Our evidence includes sworn testimony, financial records, and communications between Bondi and registered lobbyists that point to a concerning abuse of influence. He clicked his pen, then turned to Bondi. While the evidence may appear circumstantial on the surface, its volume and consistency create a clear picture of intentional misconduct. Bondi didn't react, not a twitch. Justice Barrett leaned slightly forward, resting her fingers together. Ms. Bondi, do you have legal representation today? Pam finally spoke, her voice even, with that low resonance that doesn't beg to be heard. It demands it. I will be representing myself, Justice. Barrett's eyebrows lifted just a hair. That's a serious choice. So are the stakes. For a moment, Barrett didn't respond. She gave a tiny nod, then said, Very well, the court will proceed. Keener continued his argument with a well-timed rhythm, hitting the committee's findings, referencing Article 2 violations, and presenting 3 alleged examples of contract manipulation tied to Bondi's office. It was clean, strong, the kind of statement that usually signaled a short day in court. But Bondi, still silent. Barrett noticed. After 20 minutes, Keener sat down. The court paused, then slowly Bondi stood. She didn't reach for notes, didn't tap a pen, just turned slightly toward the bench and began. Your Honors, she said plainly, the accusation isn't just that I broke the law, it's that I manipulated it to serve myself. That's serious. I agree with that. She paused, just long enough to make people lean in. But what happens if the law was misread before it was broken? That line got a stir. I'm going to show you that the facts used to indict me have been misinterpreted, that the communications referenced have context deliberately left out, and that this entire complaint originated from a man who has already been terminated from 3 separate government positions for falsifying reports, none of which was mentioned in the complaint packet sent to this court. Justice Barrett shifted slightly. Before I begin, Bondi said, I ask that the court allow me to present the original, unedited versions of all communications cited today, every one of which I have on record. Keener objected immediately. Your Honor, that material was not submitted in advance and could... Bondi raised a single hand. Respectfully, I emailed them to the clerk's office 3 days ago, the full batch, with timestamps. If they weren't received, I'll happily resend them now. Barrett looked toward her clerk. The young woman behind her nodded and leaned in to whisper. They're here, Barrett confirmed. Admissible. Keener blinked. Bondi walked back to her seat with the same pace she entered. Calm, quiet, but very much in control. But no one, especially not Barrett, expected what came next. The courtroom didn't exhale. It held its breath. Bondi stayed seated, waiting for the court to officially hand her the floor again. Justice Barrett gave a short nod. No small talk, no encouragement. Proceed, she said. Pam stood slowly. She didn't adjust her blouse or clear her throat. She looked straight at the bench, her hands folded neatly in front of her. The prosecution has built its argument on selective excerpts, she began. 3 contracts, 2 email chains, 1 phone transcript. That's what we're here on? She paused. Not for drama, but for calculation. Let's start with Exhibit A, she continued. The development agreement with Hamilton Strategies. The prosecution claims I used my influence to fast-track their access to state agencies, but that's not what happened. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a worn folder. This document, she held it up, was never mentioned by the prosecution. It's a signed, time-stamped conflict of interest waiver from the governor's office, dated 2 weeks before I even spoke with Hamilton's reps. The timeline isn't off by days, it's off by months. She handed the copy to the clerk. Keener shifted in his seat. He didn't interrupt, but his jaw clenched ever so slightly. "I'll continue," Bondi said, her voice picking up speed but never losing precision. Exhibit B, emails with Montlake Consulting. The prosecution implies I invited the firm to bid on a state contract while I was still in office, but what was left out is this. She stepped to the projector. Click. The screen lit up behind her. The full email thread, not just my reply. The initiating message came from a public affairs director asking if I'd be open to joining the firm after my term ended. My response? Happy to discuss in a personal capacity once I am fully out of public office. That's it. Nothing more. Barrett leaned back slightly, watching. Now, Exhibit C, Bondi continued, a recorded phone call with a Tallahassee developer. The prosecution plays a snippet where I mention helping clear things through the licensing board. But if you listen to the full call, which I've submitted, you'll hear that I was referring to a friend of mine, a local restaurant owner, and not the developer at all. It's not even the same conversation. Keener looked to object. Barrett raised her hand and said, "Let her finish." The courtroom stayed hushed. Bondi paced slightly, turning back toward the bench. Your Honors, this complaint wasn't just constructed on weak evidence. It was edited, massaged, stripped of critical context, and at its heart is a man who worked under me for less than 7 months, who was fired for doctoring a housing permit application, and who, according to our HR records, was warned twice for internal misconduct. She paused, then softened her voice. I didn't come here to win sympathy. I came here because I know what this courtroom is. It's not a place where careers go to die. It's where facts are sorted from noise. A stillness settled again. Justice Rosario, 2 chairs down from Barrett, looked toward the lead clerk, whispered something. The clerk nodded. Barrett finally spoke. You mentioned the original complaint author was terminated. Is there documentation of that? Yes, ma'am. Included in Supplement Packet 4, page 13. Barrett flipped through, then held the document up for the other justices. Keener finally rose. Your Honors, he said carefully, the volume of rebuttal material being introduced here, some of it outside the window of pretrial submission, puts us at a disadvantage in response preparation. Bondi didn't even turn to look at him. Barrett looked up. And yet, none of this was challenged or objected to before the hearing, despite receiving notice. Keener hesitated. No, Your Honor. Barrett rested her chin on her knuckles, eyes still locked on Bondi. Ms. Bondi, she said, anything else you'd like us to hear? Bondi finally broke a hint of a smile. Yes, but I was waiting for someone to ask. But Bondi hadn't started fighting yet. She was still warming up. The smile disappeared as fast as it came. Bondi opened the next folder. Her tone was quieter now, but sharper. The kind of calm you hear when someone's about to strike with precision, not volume. I'd like to turn your attention, she said, to the memo sent from the Office of Government Accountability to the Florida Ethics Commission last year. It was used to validate the basis of this complaint. She held it up, then set it gently on the table. This memo, she continued, contains language that was lifted, nearly word for word, from a think tank policy draft published 4 years earlier. Not cited, not referenced, just inserted. Barrett raised her chin slightly. You're saying the official complaint source was plagiarized? Bondi nodded once. Yes, and I've submitted a comparative analysis in Packet 5. Barrett motioned to the clerk. The document was passed to the bench. Justice Eubanks, seated far left, murmured, That's not nothing. Barrett didn't speak yet. She was watching Bondi like a scientist watches a rare reaction. Keener, clearly rattled, leaned into the mic. Your Honors, even if the language was similar, it doesn't negate the factual core of the accusations. Bondi turned toward him. Then your case should rest on the facts, not words borrowed from a biased white paper that was never peer-reviewed. Barrett finally sat forward, hands folded, her eyes narrowing. Ms. Bondi, she said slowly, are you asserting that this entire ethics complaint was coordinated, possibly politically motivated? I'm asserting, Bondi replied, that it was lazy. That it assumed I'd walk in here with a lawyer, try to cut a deal, or plead administrative error. And when I didn't, it got uncomfortable. There was a pause. Barrett didn't respond right away. She just stared at Bondi, like someone reading a book they'd misjudged by the cover. Then came the question no one expected. Why didn't you hire representation? Bondi didn't blink. Because no one can explain my life better than I can. And because if this court wanted to see me punished, it needed to see me, not a law firm logo. The room stayed frozen for a moment. Even Keener stopped flipping through his notes. Barrett nodded, just slightly. Very well. Then she leaned back. But I have questions. She uncrossed her arms and rested them on the table in front of her. In your 2018 communication with the Southern Coalition of Civic Reform, there's mention of a wink and nudge exchange regarding a contractor's clearance. Do you deny that reference refers to improper conduct? Bondi didn't flinch. Yes, I deny it. Barrett raised a brow. And what did it refer to then? It was sarcasm. The full email shows that clearly. We were mocking how slowly the process was going, not celebrating favoritism. Convenient interpretation, Barrett said. Bondi gave a tight smile. You're welcome to read it aloud. Page 47. Barrett flipped to the page. Quiet filled the room as she scanned the paragraph. Then her eyes stopped. Her jaw didn't move, but something behind her expression did. She passed the page down to Justice Rosario without a word. The younger justice read it, then looked at Barrett. She's right. Barrett didn't look at Bondi. She looked out across the room, like she was watching something far older than this case play out, like she was re-evaluating the rules themselves. Do you think the justice system treats public women differently? Barrett asked suddenly. Bondi didn't pause. I think the system treats unapologetic women differently. We scare people, especially when we don't smile through accusations. A few murmurs from the gallery. Barrett didn't tell them to quiet down. She was still looking at Bondi, but not the way she had earlier. Not as someone suspicious, as someone familiar. But when Barrett left the bench for recess, she wasn't thinking like a judge. She was thinking like a rival. The door clicked shut behind Justice Barrett. Inside the robing room, it was just her, 2 clerks, and a carafe of untouched coffee. She didn't sit. She paced, slow, deliberate, thinking like someone who just got handed a jigsaw puzzle with missing corners. She picked up the memo Bondi had referenced earlier. Pages marked with tabs, sections highlighted. Not the kind of folder thrown together to impress. It was built to prove. Have you ever seen someone dismantle a federal complaint like that? She asked her senior clerk. He shook his head. No, ma'am. Not like that. Not without a team. She tapped her finger against the margin. This wasn't just defense. She preempted everything. Who does that solo? Her younger clerk hesitated before speaking. Honestly, someone who's been underestimated for a very long time. Barrett didn't answer right away. She sat down and opened a drawer. Inside was a manila folder marked with Bondi's name. Her entire legal history. Old interviews. Cases she'd won. Cases she'd lost. Barrett flipped to a case from 2011. Bondi versus Northgate Pharmaceuticals. A messy suit. Bondi had sued on behalf of the state for misleading addiction treatment ads. She was mocked for it at the time, called dramatic, too emotional. But the case had forced Northgate to settle. $38 million in damages. Barrett underlined the figure. She remembered watching that from a distance. Back then, she hadn't been on the bench. Just another professor trying to publish enough to matter. She remembered thinking, bold move. Probably too bold. Now she wasn't so sure. She stood again, walked to the window. Outside, DC buzzed as it always did. But inside her head, a quiet thought was growing louder. Have we been reading her wrong all along? There was a knock at the door. Another justice stepped in. Eubanks, older, more measured. She's impressive, he said without prompting. Barrett glanced over. You think? She hasn't missed a step. Not one. No grandstanding. Just precision. Barrett didn't respond. Eubanks walked toward the coffee, but didn't pour. You planning to keep pressing her? I don't like being caught flat-footed, Barrett admitted. That's not what this is about, he said. You think if you push her harder, she'll crack. She might. Eubanks turned. Or she might keep reminding us we judged the cover, not the book. Barrett sighed. She wasn't used to hesitation. Her instincts were sharp, but this wasn't a normal case, and Bondi wasn't reacting the way most people did when they stood alone before the nation's highest court. She was holding the room, without raising her voice, without demanding respect. She earned it. Barrett looked back down at the memo. "She's not just defending herself," she said. "She's flipping the mirror." Outside the chamber, Bondi waited on a wooden bench in the hallway, her briefcase beside her still locked. She wasn't scrolling a phone. She wasn't chatting with anyone. Just staring straight ahead, as if she were reviewing every possible way this could end. A security guard passed by and paused. "You doing all right, ma'am?" Bondi smiled briefly. "I'm fine." He nodded and moved on. Inside the robing room, Barrett was staring at the same folder again. One line in Bondi's opening statement echoed in her mind. If this court wanted to see me punished, it needed to see me. She looked at the clock. "Time," she said to her clerks. She straightened her robe, lifted her notes, and stepped toward the door. But the next round wouldn't just test Bondi. It would test Barrett's principles. The courtroom stood still as Justice Barrett returned to the bench. She didn't look at the spectators, the reporters, or even Keener. Her eyes went straight to Bondi, who was already on her feet, hands folded, waiting. "Ms. Bondi," Barrett said, her voice even, "you may proceed." Pam gave a slight nod. "Thank you, Your Honor." She stepped forward. Her tone was calm, but the words she spoke next cut through the air like wire. "I'd like to speak directly to the issue this court hasn't yet named." She let the silence hang. "Why me?" She looked from one justice to the next. There are dozens of public officials who've played fast and loose with influence. Many of them are still in office. But I'm here, alone, on charges built from half emails, cherry-picked memos, and commentary taken from conversations no one bothered to verify. That's not coincidence. Barrett shifted slightly. Not discomfort, focus. This complaint, Bondi continued, holding up a printed copy, was filed anonymously. It used language borrowed from partisan policy groups. And yet, it moved through every checkpoint untouched until it landed here. Why? She walked closer to the bench. Because the system doesn't always work on truth. It works on timing, on who's in power, on who's supposed to stay quiet. Justice Rosario furrowed her brow. "Are you implying judicial bias?" "No," Bondi replied quickly. "I'm implying something more dangerous, assumptions. The assumption that if a woman like me fights back too hard, she must be guilty. The assumption that confidence equals arrogance, that silence equals admission." Her voice never rose, but something in it began to ripple through the room. "Look through the material I submitted, every record, every message, every page. Not one piece of verified evidence links me to an illegal act. Not one. But still, I had to come here and prove my innocence, rather than have the state prove my guilt." Barrett's fingers tapped once against her desk. Just once. Then they stopped. Bondi walked toward the screen. "I'd like to show you something," she said. Click. A slide appeared. 3 side-by-side screenshots of headlines. One from a conservative outlet, one from a centrist blog, one from a liberal paper. All posted within an hour of each other the day the complaint became public. Each one used a different angle, but the same image. Her, walking out of a building, head down, hair loose. The lighting made it look like she was ashamed. That was the photo the press had picked. "I walked out of a strategy meeting that day," Bondi said. "I wasn't hiding. I was thinking." Another click. The raw photo appeared. In it, she was mid-step, mid-sentence, her mouth open, talking to a colleague. Nothing about it looked scandalous. "You changed the crop, you changed the story." That line sat in the air like smoke. "I didn't come here to accuse anyone, but I am asking the court to consider what it rewards. Loud accusations, or measured fact, gut reactions, or due process." She turned toward Barrett. "You asked earlier why I didn't bring a legal team. The truth is, I wanted you to see this for what it really was, me, standing on the same ground you once did, proving myself alone." Barrett didn't answer, not with words, but her eyes changed. Something inside her had already shifted. Keener didn't stand to rebut. There was nothing left to say. Bondi returned to her seat. She didn't look triumphant. She looked steady, like someone who had just finished a marathon barefoot and wasn't asking for applause. Barrett addressed the bench. This hearing will recess for deliberation. The gavel struck once, but what Barrett said next, no one could have prepared for. When the justices returned, there were no whispers, no fidgeting, just eyes, all fixed on the bench. Even the press, always ready to twist their bodies for the best angle, sat unnaturally still. Justice Amy Coney Barrett looked different now. Not physically, but in presence. Less guarded, more certain. She lifted her notes, glanced across the room, and began. This court has reviewed the submitted documents, full communications, corroborating records, and arguments made during this hearing. In light of the evidence presented, not just by the prosecution, but more critically, by Ms. Bondi herself, we find no sufficient grounds to support the allegations of ethics violations or misuse of office. Keener stared down at the table. He didn't move. Barrett continued. Furthermore, she said, her tone tightening, this court notes significant procedural gaps in how the original complaint advanced to this level, gaps that reflect a breakdown in how we assess credibility and context. We will be initiating a review of those procedures. Bondi didn't smile. She closed her folder gently and nodded once, like someone finishing a job, not celebrating a win. Justice Eubanks spoke next. Ms. Bondi, you're dismissed without sanction. Barrett, however, wasn't done. I would like to add something on the record, she said, lifting her gaze. All eyes returned to her. When this hearing was scheduled, I, like many, anticipated a straightforward review. The kind of case that comes with assumptions baked in. Assumptions about motive, about power, about personality. She let that hang for a second. But what we saw was a demonstration, not just of defense, but of clarity, of restraint, and of intelligence wielded without spectacle. Now she looked directly at Bondi. You stood alone in this chamber, under scrutiny that would break most, and you did not posture. You did not perform. You simply proved. There was a long silence. I don't give out compliments from this bench, she said, but today you reminded this court that intellect doesn't always come dressed in tradition. Sometimes it walks in with no backup and a briefcase full of truth. With that, she tapped the gavel once. This hearing is closed. No applause, no fanfare, but there was a weight in the room. Not the kind that crushes, but the kind that settles after something real happens. Outside, reporters surged forward, shouting questions. Ms. Bondi, any comment on the court's decision? She stopped at the top of the stairs. Just one sentence. I walked in with my name. I walked out with it intact. Then she kept walking. Behind closed doors, Justice Barrett returned to her office, sat down, and stared at the now empty file folder. After a minute, she picked up a pen and wrote a single line at the top of a yellow legal pad. Assumptions are the laziest form of judgment. She underlined it once. That evening, legal analysts scrambled to reframe their talking points. Pundits who'd pre-written takedown segments rushed to re-edit. Some called it a rare courtroom upset. Others tried to spin it as a political calculation gone wrong. But the people who watched the whole thing, the courtroom staff, the junior clerks, the law students watching the live stream from their lecture halls, knew what it really was. A woman walked into the highest court in the land with every reason to fold, and didn't. She stood, she argued, and she won. Not just her name back, but a level of respect most never earn. Especially not alone. In a world that often demands teams, titles, and theatrics to be taken seriously, sometimes all you need is the truth, a steady voice, and the nerve to stand tall with no one behind you. If this story made you think twice about assumptions, about what real strength looks like, subscribe for more. These aren't just stories, they're reminders.